Hello, welcome back to Cracking the Cryptic, where today, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I thought it might be worth A, going through some of the clues in today's Times crossword, which was quite difficult, and B, let you all know about this thing called the crossword snitch, which is most relevant for Times crossword solvers, but it's an index that you can find on the internet which sort of plots how difficult that day's Times crossword is. You can see it, Snitch apparently stands for Same Day Numeric Index of Times Cryptic Hardness. Now, the way I think this works is that a score of 100 would be an average difficulty puzzle, and scores above 100, you can see there, once you get beyond 138, it's very hard. And it's quite interesting the way that they determine this. What they do is that they take known solvers and then they look at how their time on the puzzle, on that day's puzzle, compared to their average time, which they seem to have stored up somehow on this site. And I thought this might be useful for some of you who are new to the Times crossword, because if you just visit the site, you can find it just by typing in crossword snitch into Google. And if you look at that in the morning before you do the Times crossword, you'll discover whether that day's puzzle is incredibly difficult or perhaps on the easier side. And depending on, if you're new to this, you might prefer a puzzle that isn't that hard. And this is a way of discovering that before you actually do it. So let's go to the way that they calculate the detail here. You can see, so for example, what they've done is they've looked at some of the best solvers on the site who they view as real solvers. So they eliminate all of the neutrinos, as we call them, the people who do it on paper first and then type it in for some reason. Who knows why people do that? But anyway, so Magoo there, obviously that's Mark Goodlift, 10 times crossword champion. His average time is 6:27, and his time on this puzzle was more than double his average time, so that gave him a personal niche of 214, and that's obviously contributing to the fact that this is considered to be a very difficult puzzle. So the crossword snitch, there it is. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at why this puzzle is difficult. Oops, I can actually, that's not going to work, is it? Let's try and do that a little bit better. Okay. I mean, there are a variety of reasons. Firstly, you needed to know quite a lot of crossword ease, I think, to even make a stab at some of these clues. And secondly, some of the entries were very difficult. One down in particular was crossing with some difficult entries, and it was a word I had never come across. So well done if you were able to write that in. I suspect it was one down that accounts for the variability in the solving times today. I think if you looked at famed Assyrian and were able to write in the answer there, then your advantage was absolutely stellar over the average solver. Anyway, let's just talk a bit about what do I mean by crossword ease? Well, I mean things that a regular solver of the Times crossword would just know and be able to leverage off. So in this clue, ready to assimilate city formula. Well, when we see city, there are, I think, 4 possibilities for 2-letter answers, or 2-letter synonyms for the word city. You have the obvious American cities of New York and LA, which are NY and LA, or Los Angeles, obviously. And then you have which is the biblical city, UR, that often comes up. When city is capitalized like this, it can quite often mean the City of London, which is often abbreviated to EC because of the postcode in the centre of the city. So if you read this clue now, ready to assimilate city, and you think the possibility here is EC, you're obviously looking for a 4-letter word, which means ready, surrounding this EC to give a word which means formula. And it's still not maybe that easy, but it gives you a fighting chance of finding recipe, which is ripe for ready around the outside there. And I think obviously if you have that in your toolkit, you're at a massive advantage. Now let's have a look here. This one again, I think this clue is almost a write-in for an experienced solver, but might not be for newer solvers. Why do I say that? Well, clear river containing single rodent. The moment I read that clue, I'm going through these short rivers that I'm very familiar with from solving the times and trying to put them around something else, because we've got the river containing some other things. Now, the most obvious rivers that contain other things would be the D, because that would be a very common sort of beginning and end to a word, and also the X. And if you're considering this clue now, just thinking of those two possibilities, it becomes so much easier. Combine that with the fact that rodent, well, what's a short synonym for a rodent? I think the one we'd all come up with would be rat. And if you're thinking along this line, it's suddenly much easier to come up with exonerate there. Now, which other clues did I think were very much about whether or not this clue? About to introduce tax break. Well, you need to be aware that there are 3 or 4 very short synonyms for the word tax. And perhaps the most common one is VAT, obviously for VAT. So always be thinking about that one. But other old taxes that you sometimes see are Scot, which is an old tax, but also cess. So if you know the possibility that cess is a tax, this clue, again, especially if you've got that E there, becomes solvable. About for introducing, i.e. preceding a word that means tax, which is cess there, and a 6-letter word which means break, recess. All of a sudden it becomes doable. Now, which other clues did I think were susceptible to that sort of logic? Well, not many, I suppose. I did cold solve this one, which was probably my best piece of solving this puzzle. So charge bundle to keep bird on ground. Now, why is this clue difficult? Well, it's difficult because there are so many little bits and pieces to it that could mean different things. So one thing to be aware of when you see the word ground in a crossword clue is that obviously it could refer to land or the earth or mud or something like that, but ground can also be an anagram indicator, because if you grind things up, you would be mixing them, and ground. So ground in that sense is a very cryptic way of indicating an anagram. Now, in fact here what we needed to do was to come up, the way I solved it was to come up with a short synonym for the word bundle, and eventually I came up with wad for that. Now, if wad is keeping a bird on ground, and I read that eventually as meaning perhaps that's a flightless bird, and I'm familiar with a rhea, R-H-E-A, which is one of those flightless birds, along with, I don't know, some of the others. Emu, I think, is the most often used. But I needed a 4-letter one, and that gave me warhead, which of course is a charge. So that's a very hard clue. Feel no embarrassment if you didn't solve that one first up. Let's just take a look. I mean, 10 across I thought was also very, very hard. Right-hand man keeping to hyperbole. Well, the way to solve this, or the way to give yourself a foot in the door to solve this, is to read the words keeping to correctly. Because right-hand man keeping to, I was thinking, okay, I need to put the word to inside something else. Now, I was thinking of a 6-letter word which meant a right-hand man. I was thinking maybe Friday, as in man Friday, might be a right-hand man. But in fact here it's really horrible. You need to come up with right hand as an abbreviation for RH, which is valid. Now if you can put 2 in a 4-letter word for a man, well, I mean, once you get this as the start, it's not too difficult to come up with rhetoric for hyperbole, but very, very difficult to solve cold. This one, goodness me, I spent a long time on this. I convinced myself for ages that it was something to do with Kublai Khan, because I'd misremembered the Abyssinian maid as an Assyrian maid, and on the dulcimer she played, etc., etc. So I was trying to work out how this was related to Coleridge, but it's not. What you needed to know here, and this is again very difficult, but in some ways it's harder for an experienced solver, which is, I think, why you saw Mark have a high time here, because house, well, there's 2 possibilities. The most common one is HO, which is a valid abbreviation for house. But the second thought that you might have if you see the word house is to think about astrological houses. So Aries, Leo, etc., etc. These would all be valid houses, which could, house is home to sheep. Well, if you're trying to put one of those words around one of the numerous words sheep, and I'm thinking here of ewe, E-W-E, ram, tup, and probably others as well. It's not easy, especially if you're not quite sure that you know the famed Assyrian in question. Eventually, you might have got enough checking letters though to solve this. House was in fact semi, as in a semi-detached house. Is was just plain, and now we need a 3-letter word for a sheep beginning with R. Well, ram. Believe it or not, Semiramis, if that's how you say it, was a famous Assyrian. So very well done if you were able to solve that cold. What I needed to do was to solve all the crossing entries first, which, believe me, was not easy. If you look at some of these, one supporting cuts was sawhorse, as in, something you would place something on when you were cutting it. Met with night being saw, and then night was horse there, as in sort of the shape of the chess piece. It's very hard to see that. And this was not easy. See on the moon finally eclipsed. Well, I'm not even sure how you say it, whether it's mare or mare, but M-A-R-E is a word that's used. I think I had this on Chambers earlier. Let's have a quick look, in fact. You can see there are a couple of examples of closed seas, darkish areas on the moon or Mars. So you needed to restrict that entry to come up with a word meaning wreck. Now I think if you mar something, I think wreck is, if you wreck something, it's a bit stronger than the word mar, but anyway, that was the answer. And then 12 across was also very difficult. So current in which Her Majesty's ships lost way. Well, the way you needed to solve this is you needed to think that current might be the word modern. And if you remove the Royal Navy, as in Her Majesty's ships, from the word modern, you would come up with the word mode, which is away. So very hard indeed. So anyway, I don't want the video to be too long. I hope there was some pause for thought here, and if you do enjoy these videos, please do comment on them and give us some feedback and tell us what you like and what you don't like, and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you again next time on Cracking the Cryptic.